The day started like any other for the passengers boarding Flight 347 from Washington Dulles International Airport to Chicago. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac as travelers shuffled through security checkpoints, dragging suitcases and clutching coffee cups. Among them was a middle-aged woman named Patricia, dressed in an expensive navy blue pantsuit that screamed professionalism. Her blonde hair was neatly styled, and her designer handbag hung confidently over her shoulder. She moved with purpose, scanning the crowd around her with sharp, calculating eyes. Patricia wasn't one to blend into the background. She had strong opinions about everything, from politics to parenting, and she rarely hesitated to voice them. Today, however, her focus wasn't on policy debates or societal issues. It was on the man seated across the aisle from her once she settled into her window seat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and black, wearing a simple leather jacket over a plain white t-shirt paired with dark jeans. His presence immediately caught Patricia's attention, not because he did anything out of the ordinary, but because of what he represented in her mind. As the plane filled up, Patricia leaned toward her husband, John, who sat beside her. "Do you see him?" she whispered, nodding subtly toward the man across the aisle. John glanced briefly before returning his gaze to the book in his lap. "Who? The guy in the leather jacket?" he asked, his tone indifferent. Patricia nodded emphatically. "Yes, him. There's something off about him," she continued, lowering her voice further. "I mean, look at him. Why is he dressed so casually? And why does he keep looking at his phone like that?" John sighed, used to his wife's tendency to jump to conclusions. "Maybe he's just checking emails or messages," he suggested half-heartedly, hoping to end the conversation. But Patricia wasn't satisfied. To her, the man's calm demeanor felt suspicious rather than reassuring. Every time he shifted in his seat or scrolled through his phone, her unease deepened. It wasn't just his appearance that bothered her. It was the way he seemed so relaxed, almost too comfortable in this space. In Patricia's mind, people like him didn't belong in first-class cabins or on flights full of professionals. They were supposed to stick to certain neighborhoods, certain jobs, certain roles. That's how she saw the world, even if she would never admit it aloud. When the flight attendants began their routine safety demonstration, Patricia couldn't help but notice how the man ignored them entirely, keeping his attention fixed on his phone. This small act of perceived disrespect only fueled her growing irritation. By the time the plane taxied down the runway, she had convinced herself that there was something inherently wrong about him being there. Her thoughts spiraled. What if he was up to no good? What if he posed a threat to everyone else on board? These questions swirled in her mind, unchecked and unchallenged by reason or logic. As the plane ascended into the sky, Patricia decided she needed to do something. Leaning forward slightly, she flagged down a passing flight attendant. When the young woman approached, Patricia gestured discreetly toward the man across the aisle. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low but firm. "I need to talk to you about that gentleman over there. I don't feel safe with him on this flight." The flight attendant blinked, momentarily taken aback by the request. "Ma'am, all passengers go through rigorous security screenings before boarding," she replied politely, attempting to reassure Patricia. But Patricia wasn't reassured. If anything, the flight attendant's response made her more determined to press her point. "That doesn't matter," Patricia insisted, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to keep it quiet. "You can't tell me he looks normal. Just look at him. He's acting strange, and I won't sit here silently while my safety is compromised." Passengers nearby began to take notice, craning their necks to see what the commotion was about. Some exchanged worried glances, wondering if they should share Patricia's concern. Others rolled their eyes, clearly annoyed by the disruption. The flight attendant, caught between duty and diplomacy, tried again to calm the situation. "Ma'am, please understand that we can't make assumptions about anyone based on how they look or behave," she explained gently. "If you have specific concerns, I'll be happy to relay them to the captain, but I assure you, everyone on this flight has been cleared for travel." Patricia bristled at the suggestion that her concerns might not be valid. How dare this young woman dismiss her instincts? Didn't she realize that Patricia had years of experience reading people? Surely, her gut feeling counted for something. Across the aisle, the man remained oblivious to the drama unfolding around him, at least outwardly. Inside, though, he was acutely aware of Patricia's scrutiny. He'd dealt with situations like this before, where strangers judged him harshly without knowing a single thing about him. It was exhausting, having to constantly prove his humanity to people who refused to see beyond the color of his skin. Still, he chose not to engage. Instead, he focused on his phone, scrolling through work-related emails and mentally preparing for the meetings awaiting him in Chicago. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the tension in the cabin had become unbearable. Patricia, frustrated by the lack of action from the flight crew, grew bolder in her complaints. She began speaking louder, ensuring that those around her could hear every word. "This isn't right," she exclaimed, pointing accusingly at the man. "No one seems to care that I'm uncomfortable, but what happens if something goes wrong? Who will take responsibility then?" Her words hung heavy in the air, dividing the passengers into factions. Some sympathized with her, nodding along and murmuring their agreement. Others shook their heads in disbelief, muttering under their breath about the absurdity of the situation. One particularly vocal passenger, a middle-aged man sitting 2 rows behind Patricia, finally spoke up. "Lady, leave him alone," he said loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "He hasn't done anything wrong. You're causing a scene over nothing." Patricia whipped her head around, glaring daggers at the man who dared challenge her. "How would you know?" she shot back. "Have you talked to him? Do you know what he's capable of?" The man snorted derisively. "And you do? Give me a break." The argument escalated quickly, with voices rising and tempers flaring. The flight attendant intervened once more, pleading with everyone to remain calm. But the damage was done. The atmosphere on the plane had shifted irreversibly, transforming what should have been a routine flight into a powder keg of emotions. For Patricia, the stakes felt higher than ever. She believed she was fighting for justice, for her own peace of mind and the safety of everyone else on board. What she failed to recognize, however, was the harm her actions were causing, not just to the man across the aisle, but to the fabric of civility holding the cabin together. Unbeknownst to Patricia, the man she accused so vehemently held a position of immense importance. A high-ranking official at the Pentagon, he traveled frequently for work, often blending seamlessly into crowds despite his prestigious role. To him, this flight was just another leg of a busy schedule. To Patricia, it was a battleground where her prejudices clashed with reality. Little did she know her misguided crusade would soon unravel in ways she could never have anticipated, leaving her, and everyone else on that plane, to grapple with the consequences of her choices. As the argument on the plane intensified, the tension in the cabin reached a boiling point. Patricia, now fully entrenched in her crusade, refused to back down. Her voice grew louder with each passing minute, echoing off the walls of the aircraft, and drawing stares from passengers who had initially tried to ignore the commotion. The man across the aisle remained silent, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Patricia's escalating agitation. To those watching, it was clear that this wasn't just about one person feeling unsafe. It was about power dynamics, unchecked biases, and the dangerous consequences of prejudice. The flight attendant, caught between Patricia's demands and the need to maintain order, attempted once more to mediate. "Ma'am, please lower your voice," she urged, her tone firmer this time. "We're doing everything we can to ensure everyone feels comfortable, but we also have to respect all our passengers." Patricia scoffed at the suggestion, waving her hand dismissively. "Comfortable? How can I be comfortable when there's someone suspicious sitting right there?" she snapped, jabbing her finger toward the man. Her accusation hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and oppressive. By now, the entire cabin was divided. Some passengers nodded along with Patricia, their faces reflecting a mix of fear and agreement. Others openly sided with the man, shaking, their heads in disbelief at the absurdity of the situation. One elderly woman leaned over to her seatmate and muttered, "This is ridiculous. That poor man hasn't done a thing wrong. A younger passenger chimed in, raising his voice enough for Patricia to hear. You're being racist, plain and simple. Just leave him alone. The accusation struck a nerve, causing Patricia to stiffen in her seat. She glared at the young man, her cheeks flushing red with anger. Racist? Me? You don't know anything. About me? She retorted, her voice cracking slightly under the weight of defensiveness. The man across the aisle finally looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. For the first time since the ordeal began, he addressed the flight attendant directly. Excuse me, he said calmly, his deep voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. I understand there's some concern here, but I assure you, I'm not a threat. I'm simply traveling for work. His words carried an air of authority, though he kept his tone measured and polite. Patricia, however, wasn't swayed. If anything, his composure only fueled her suspicion. That's exactly what someone would say if they were trying to hide something, she shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. At this point, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, breaking through the noise. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disturbance. Our crew is working to resolve the matter as quickly as possible. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. The announcement did little to quell the tension. Instead, it seemed to heighten it. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves about what might happen next. Would the plane turn around? Would someone be removed? The uncertainty gnawed at everyone, making the confined space feel even smaller. Behind the scenes, the flight attendants huddled together near the galley, discussing how to handle the situation. They knew they couldn't ignore Patricia's complaints entirely. Airline policies required them to address any passenger concerns about safety, but they also recognized the potential backlash of removing someone based solely on another passenger's unfounded accusations. After several minutes of deliberation, the lead flight attendant approached Patricia again. Ma'am, we've decided to speak with the gentleman privately to assess the situation further, she explained, hoping to placate her. But Patricia wasn't satisfied. Assess what? He's clearly a problem, she exclaimed, throwing her hands up in exasperation. Meanwhile, the man across the aisle continued to scroll through his phone, seemingly unfazed by the growing drama. In reality, though, he was acutely aware of every word being said about him. Years of experience dealing with similar situations had taught him to stay composed, no matter how unjust or frustrating they might be. Still, that didn't mean he wasn't affected. Each accusation, each loaded glance from strangers chipped away at his patience. He reminded himself that reacting emotionally wouldn't help. He needed to remain professional, especially given the nature of his job. When the lead flight attendant finally approached him, he set his phone aside and gave her his full attention. Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience, but we've received reports from another passenger expressing concerns about your presence on the flight, she said carefully, choosing her words with precision. The man raised an eyebrow, his expression neutral. Concerns? He repeated, letting the word hang in the air. The flight attendant nodded. Yes, sir. We're required to investigate any claims related to passenger safety. Can you confirm your identity and purpose for travel? Without hesitation, the man pulled out his ID badge, a sleek, official-looking card bearing the insignia of the U.S. Department of Defense. My name is Marcus Johnson, he said evenly. I work for the Pentagon and I'm traveling to Chicago for a meeting tomorrow morning. The flight attendant's eyes widened in surprise as she examined the badge. Even after years of working in aviation, encountering someone with such high-level credentials was rare. She thanked him quietly and returned to her colleagues, relaying the information. Back at Patricia's seat, the lead flight attendant delivered the news. Ma'am, we've spoken with the gentleman, and he has provided valid identification, confirming his identity and reason for travel, she explained. He works for the Pentagon and poses no threat to anyone on this flight. Patricia blinked, momentarily stunned. The Pentagon? She echoed, her voice faltering for the first time. The flight attendant nodded. Yes, ma'am. We appreciate your concern, but we must ask you to refrain from making baseless accusations moving forward. For a brief moment, silence fell over the cabin. Patricia sank back into her seat, her face pale and her lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced across the aisle at Marcus, who met her gaze briefly before returning to his phone. The realization of what she had done, and the gravity of her mistake began to sink in. Around her, passengers whispered amongst themselves, some shaking their heads in disapproval while others smirked knowingly. The tide had turned, and Patricia found herself isolated, her earlier confidence crumbling under the weight of shame. Despite the resolution, the damage had been done. The atmosphere on the plane remained tense, with many passengers unable to shake off the discomfort of witnessing such blatant discrimination. Marcus, for his part, chose not to dwell on the incident. He understood that people like Patricia existed, individuals, whose worldview was shaped by ignorance and fear, but he refused to let their actions define his day. Instead, he focused on preparing for his upcoming meetings, reminding himself of the importance of his work and the impact it had on national security. As the plane continued its journey toward Chicago, the mood gradually shifted. Conversations resumed, albeit cautiously, as passengers processed what had transpired. Some expressed admiration for Marcus's composure, while others criticized Patricia's behavior, labeling it as both reckless and harmful. Social media played a role too, as several passengers discreetly filmed parts of the altercation and uploaded clips online. Within hours, the story began to spread, sparking debates about racial profiling, privilege, and accountability in public spaces. For Patricia, the remainder of the flight felt endless. Every glance, every murmur seemed directed at her, amplifying her embarrassment. She avoided eye contact with everyone, including her husband, who sat silently beside her, unsure of how to comfort her. Deep down, she knew she had crossed a line, a fact that became increasingly difficult to ignore as the plane descended toward O'Hare International Airport. When the wheels touched down, a collective sigh of relief swept through the cabin. For most passengers, the ordeal was over. For Patricia, however, it was only the beginning of a much longer reckoning. As the plane taxied to its gate at O'Hare International Airport, the tension in the cabin lingered like a storm cloud that refused to dissipate. Passengers began gathering their belongings, eager to disembark and leave behind the uncomfortable scene that had unfolded. But for Marcus Johnson, the man at the center of the controversy, the ordeal was far from over. As he stood up to retrieve his carry-on bag from the overhead compartment, whispers rippled through the aisle. Some passengers nodded respectfully in his direction, while others avoided eye contact altogether, unsure of how to process what they had witnessed. Patricia, still seated near the window, looked visibly shaken. Her earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by a mix of shame and disbelief. She glanced toward Marcus as he passed her row, clutching his leather satchel with quiet dignity. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met, but Marcus didn't say a word. He simply walked on, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Patricia's husband placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, though it did little to ease her distress. The weight of her actions, and the realization of who Marcus truly was, pressed down on her like a leaden cloak. Once outside the aircraft, chaos erupted almost immediately. Reporters and news crews stationed at the terminal had been tipped off about the incident, thanks to social media posts from passengers who had filmed parts of the altercation. Cameras flashed wildly as Marcus stepped into the bustling concourse, his composed demeanor drawing even more attention. Journalists swarmed around him, firing questions rapidly. "Sir, can you tell us what happened on the flight? How do you feel about being targeted because of your race? What will you do next?" Marcus paused briefly, raising a hand to signal for calm. Despite the whirlwind surrounding him, he remained unfazed. "I appreciate the concern," he said, in a measured tone, "but I'd rather not comment further at this time. This situation speaks for itself." His response only fueled speculation, prompting reporters to dig deeper. Meanwhile, other passengers exiting the plane were quick to share their perspectives. painting a vivid picture of the drama that had unfolded midair. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like Childish Justice for Marcus and #Stop Racial Profiling, turning the incident into a national conversation. Back inside the terminal, Patricia emerged last, her face flushed with embarrassment. As soon as she stepped into the public area, cameras turned to her, capturing every awkward shuffle and nervous glance. Reporters bombarded her with questions too, their voices sharp and accusatory. "Ma'am, why did you accuse Mr. Johnson of being a threat?" one journalist demanded. Another chimed in, "Did you know he works for the Pentagon when you made those claims?" Patricia stammered, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden spotlight. I thought I was doing the right thing," she managed to say, her voice trembling. I didn't realize." Her words trailed off as she struggled to defend herself, but the damage was done. Video clips of her halting explanation went viral within minutes, sparking outrage across the internet. Comment sections filled with criticism, calling her out for her prejudice and lack of judgment. Memes mocking her circulated widely, further amplifying the humiliation she felt. It was a public reckoning unlike anything she had ever experienced, and it left her reeling. Meanwhile, Marcus handled the aftermath with grace and professionalism. After politely declining further interviews, he made his way to a private lounge, reserved for government officials. There, he contacted his superiors at the Pentagon to brief them on the situation. While such incidents weren't uncommon for someone in his position, they were nonetheless disruptive. His colleagues expressed support, assuring him that his work took precedence over the unwarranted drama caused by strangers. Still, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the broader implications of what had happened. The airline, meanwhile, faced mounting pressure to address the fallout. Passengers who had witnessed the incident flooded customer service lines with complaints, accusing staff of mishandling the situation by entertaining Patricia's baseless accusations. Online petitions, calling for accountability, gained traction, urging the company to implement stricter policies against racial profiling. Within hours, executives issued a public apology, acknowledging the harm caused by the incident and pledging to review their protocols. "We deeply regret the discomfort experienced by our passengers today," the statement read. "No one should ever feel unsafe or discriminated against while traveling with us." Despite these efforts, the backlash continued. Critics argued that apologies weren't enough, that meaningful change required action. Advocacy groups seized the opportunity to highlight systemic issues of bias in the travel industry, using Marcus's story as a rallying cry for reform. Civil rights organizations called for mandatory diversity training for airline employees, as well as clearer guidelines for addressing passenger disputes involving race or ethnicity. The incident served as a stark reminder of how deeply ingrained prejudices could manifest in everyday interactions, often with devastating consequences. For Patricia, the days following the flight were a blur of self-reflection and regret. She retreated from public view, avoiding interviews and declining to comment further on the incident. Friends and family described her as heartbroken and mortified, struggling to come to terms with the magnitude of her mistake. In private conversations with her husband, she admitted feeling foolish for jumping to conclusions without evidence. "I thought I was protecting everyone," she confessed tearfully. "But all I did was make things worse. For him, for me, for everyone." Determined to learn from the experience, Patricia sought counseling to confront her biases head-on. She attended workshops on racial sensitivity and engaged in difficult conversations with people from diverse backgrounds, hoping to broaden her perspective. Though the journey was challenging, she recognized it as necessary, not just for her own growth but for the sake of fostering understanding in a divided world. As the weeks passed, Marcus resumed his duties at the Pentagon, earning widespread admiration for his poise during the ordeal. Inspired by the support he received, he partnered with advocacy groups to promote anti-discrimination initiatives. He believed that sharing his story could help educate others about the dangers of snap judgments and the importance of treating everyone with fairness and respect. "Prejudice isn't always loud or obvious," he said during a panel discussion. "Sometimes it's subtle, a glance, a comment, an assumption, But its impact is real, and we all have a responsibility to challenge it. While the incident faded from the headlines, its lessons endured. Airports and airlines began implementing new measures to prevent similar situations, including enhanced training programs for staff and clearer procedures for handling passenger concerns. Social media users kept the conversation alive, sharing personal stories of discrimination and calling for systemic change. And though Patricia remained largely out of the public eye, insiders revealed that she was working hard to unlearn the biases that had led her astray. In the end, the flight from Washington to Chicago became more than just a routine journey. It became a catalyst for reflection, dialogue, and progress. For Marcus, it reinforced the value of resilience and the power of leading by example. For Patricia, it marked the beginning of a painful yet transformative journey toward awareness and accountability. And for everyone else touched by the story, it served as a poignant reminder of the work still needed to create a more inclusive and equitable society. In the weeks following the incident, the ripple effects of that fateful flight continued to spread far beyond the confines of the airplane cabin. The story dominated headlines, sparking debates across news channels, social media platforms, and dinner tables nationwide. For Marcus Johnson, life slowly returned to its usual rhythm, though he found himself thrust into an unexpected role, that of a symbol for resilience and dignity in the face of prejudice. His calm response to the ordeal earned him widespread admiration, but it also placed immense pressure on him to address systemic issues he hadn't asked to champion. Advocacy groups saw an opportunity to amplify their message through Marcus's experience. Civil rights organizations invited him to speak at rallies and conferences, hoping his story would inspire meaningful change. At first, Marcus hesitated. He wasn't seeking fame or recognition. All he wanted was to focus on his demanding job at the Pentagon. But as the invitations kept coming, he realized the potential impact of sharing his perspective. "If my story can help someone understand the harm caused by bias," he told a close friend, "then I owe it to myself and to others to tell it." His first public appearance after the incident took place at a national conference on racial equity. Standing before a packed auditorium, Marcus recounted the events of the flight with quiet authority. He described how Patricia's accusations had made him feel, not angry, but weary. It wasn't the first time he'd encountered such behavior, nor would it be the last. What struck him most, however, was the way other passengers had responded. Some had rallied to his defense, while others remained silent or complicit. "That day," he said, "wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. How we react when confronted with injustice, whether we choose to speak up or stay silent." The audience listened intently, hanging on every word. When Marcus finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Many attendees approached him afterward, thanking him for his courage and sharing their own experiences of discrimination. These interactions reinforced his belief that storytelling could bridge divides and foster empathy. Over time, Marcus became a sought-after voice in discussions about race, privilege, and accountability, using his platform to advocate for systemic reforms in industries ranging from aviation to law enforcement. Meanwhile, the airline responsible for mishandling the situation faced mounting scrutiny. Passengers who had been on the flight voiced their dissatisfaction online, criticizing the crew for prioritizing Patricia's unfounded fears over Marcus's rights as a traveler. One particularly scathing review went viral. "Instead of protecting your black passenger, you let racism dictate your actions. Shame on you." The backlash forced executives to take swift action. They announced plans to overhaul their training programs, emphasizing cultural competency and conflict resolution. Additionally, they implemented stricter guidelines for addressing passenger complaints involving race or ethnicity, ensuring that future incidents wouldn't escalate unnecessarily. Despite these efforts, skepticism lingered. Critics argued that policy changes alone couldn't erase decades of institutional bias. "Training sessions are great," one commentator wrote, "but they won't fix the deeper problem. People like Patricia who think their feelings outweigh someone else's humanity." This sentiment resonated widely, prompting calls for broader societal reflection. Schools, workplaces, and community organizations began hosting workshops aimed at confronting implicit biases and fostering inclusivity. Social media played a crucial role in amplifying these conversations, with users sharing resources, personal anecdotes, and actionable steps for combating discrimination. For Patricia, the aftermath of the flight proved equally transformative, if not more so. The viral videos of her stammering apology haunted her, replaying endlessly in her mind. She avoided leaving her home for weeks, terrified of running into neighbors or acquaintances who might recognize her. Friends distanced themselves, unsure of how to reconcile the woman they knew with the figure vilified in the media. Even her husband struggled to navigate the fallout, torn between supporting his wife and grappling with his own disappointment in her actions. Determined to salvage what remained of her reputation, Patricia sought professional help. She enrolled in therapy sessions designed to unpack her deeply ingrained prejudices. Her therapist encouraged her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself, challenging her to examine why she viewed certain individuals as threats based solely on their appearance. Slowly, painfully, Patricia began to see patterns in her behavior, moments where her assumptions had led her astray, often without her realizing it. "I thought I was better than this," she admitted during one session, tears streaming down her face. "But I'm not, and I have so much work to do." As part of her healing process, Patricia decided to volunteer with organizations dedicated to promoting racial understanding. She joined a local chapter of a civil rights group, participating in community outreach programs and educational initiatives. Though initially hesitant to share her story publicly, she eventually agreed to speak at a panel discussion organized by the same advocacy group Marcus had partnered with. Sitting alongside activists and scholars, Patricia recounted her experience on the flight, acknowledging her mistakes and expressing remorse. "I let fear cloud my judgment," she said, her voice trembling but sincere. "I hurt someone because of my ignorance, and for that, I am truly sorry." Her apology divided audiences. Some praised her willingness to admit fault and commit to personal growth, viewing her journey as proof that redemption was possible. Others dismissed her efforts as insincere, accusing her of seeking absolution without fully reckoning with the harm she had caused. Regardless of public opinion, Patricia remained steadfast in her commitment to change. She immersed herself in books, documentaries, and lectures about race relations, determined to educate herself and prevent similar missteps in the future. Back at the Pentagon, Marcus continued to excel in his role, earning promotions and accolades for his contributions to national security. Yet, even as his career flourished, he never lost sight of the lessons learned from the flight. He understood that progress required patience and persistence, both on an individual level and within institutions. Whenever opportunities arose to mentor young professionals, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, Marcus seized them eagerly. He believed that representation mattered, not just in leadership roles but in everyday interactions that shaped perceptions and broke down barriers. By the end of the year, the incident had transformed into a touchstone moment for conversations about race and accountability. Airports around the country introduced new measures to combat discrimination, including anonymous reporting systems for passengers who experience bias. Airlines partnered with advocacy groups to develop inclusive marketing campaigns, showcasing diverse travelers and emphasizing equality. Meanwhile, schools incorporated lessons about privilege and allyship into their curricula, equipping younger generations with tools to challenge prejudice. Though the scars of that turbulent flight remained, for Marcus, Patricia, and countless others touched by the story, they also served as reminders of the power of resilience and redemption. Life moved forward, carrying with it the hope that difficult moments could spark positive change. As Marcus boarded another plane months later, bound for yet another meeting, he glanced around the cabin with cautious optimism. The world was far from perfect, but perhaps, step by step, it was becoming a little kinder. Months turned into a year, and the incident on Flight 347 became both a distant memory and an enduring lesson for those involved. For Marcus Johnson, life had settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by the aftermath of that fateful journey. While he continued to excel in his role at the Pentagon, balancing high-stakes meetings and strategic decisions, the ripple effects of his experience lingered. He wasn't the same man who had boarded that plane over a year ago. His perspective had shifted, deepened by the knowledge that even someone in his position wasn't immune to prejudice. Marcus often reflected on how the incident had changed him. It wasn't just about the personal indignity of being targeted. It was about recognizing the broader implications of systemic racism and bias. The flight had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths, not only about society but also about himself. "I've always known discrimination exists," he once told a colleague during a candid conversation. "But experiencing it so publicly made me realize how much work still needs to be done, not just out there, but within myself too." This realization fueled his commitment to advocacy, prompting him to take on leadership roles in initiatives aimed at fostering inclusivity in professional spaces. One such initiative was a mentorship program designed to support young professionals from underrepresented communities. Marcus poured his energy into mentoring individuals eager to break barriers in fields traditionally dominated by privilege. He shared stories of his own struggles, both overt and subtle, and encouraged his mentees to speak up when they encountered injustice. "Your voice matters," he would tell them. "Don't let anyone silence you because of who you are or where you come from." The airline industry, meanwhile, underwent significant changes in response to the public outcry sparked by the incident. New policies were implemented across major carriers, emphasizing zero tolerance for racial profiling and discriminatory practices. Training programs for flight attendants and ground staff included modules on cultural sensitivity, conflict de-escalation, and bystander intervention. These efforts weren't perfect. Some critics argued they were performative rather than transformative, but they marked a step in the right direction. Passengers began noticing small yet meaningful shifts, crew members addressing concerns more thoughtfully, clearer communication during disputes, and a greater emphasis on treating everyone with dignity. Social media played a pivotal role in sustaining momentum for change. Hashtags like "Fly with Respect" and "End Bias in Travel" trended periodically, reminding travelers of ongoing challenges while celebrating victories along the way. Stories of passengers standing up against discrimination went viral, inspiring others to do the same. One particularly heartwarming post featured a group of passengers intervening when a family of Middle Eastern descent faced unwarranted scrutiny at a security checkpoint. "We're all in this together," read the caption beneath the photo, of smiling faces united in solidarity. Moments like these reminded Marcus that progress, though slow, was possible. For Patricia, the woman whose actions had ignited the controversy, transformation came slowly but steadily. Her initial months of self-reflection gave way to a lifelong commitment to unlearning biases. Volunteering with civil rights organizations became her primary focus, allowing her to channel regret into action. She facilitated workshops on implicit bias, sharing her story as a cautionary tale. "I used to think I was open-minded," she confessed during one session. "But I wasn't. I let fear and ignorance dictate my behavior, and I hurt someone because of it. That's something I'll carry with me forever." Though not everyone forgave her, many appreciated her transparency and willingness to grow. Some workshop participants approached her after sessions, thanking her for sparking important conversations within their own circles. A few even invited her to speak at community events, where she emphasized the importance of accountability. "Admitting you're wrong is hard," she said during one talk, "but staying silent and doing nothing is worse. Change starts with acknowledging our flaws, and then working to fix them." Over time, Patricia's efforts earned her a measure of redemption, though she never sought recognition for her work. What mattered most to her was making amends, not just to Marcus, whom she hoped might someday forgive her, but to society as a whole. She understood that true healing required consistency, humility, and a willingness to listen. Her journey wasn't linear. There were setbacks and moments of doubt, Yet, through it all, she remained committed to becoming a better version of herself. Fate, however, had one final twist in store. Nearly 2 years after the incident, Marcus and Patricia crossed paths again, not aboard a plane, but at a charity gala hosted by a mutual acquaintance. Both were honored guests. Marcus for his advocacy work and Patricia for her contributions to promoting racial understanding. When Patricia spotted Marcus across the crowded room, her heart sank. Would he want nothing to do with her? Should she approach him or leave him be? After a moment of hesitation, she decided to face him directly. Walking over to where Marcus stood chatting with friends, Patricia cleared her throat nervously. "Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "May I have a moment?" Marcus turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken words. Then, to Patricia's surprise, he nodded. "Of course," he said simply, excusing himself from the group. They stepped aside, finding a quiet corner away from the crowd. Patricia clasped her hands tightly, searching for the right words. "First, I want to say, I'm sorry." She started, her voice trembling. "What I did was wrong and I can't undo it. But I hope you know I've spent every day since trying to learn from my mistakes to be better." Tears welled in her eyes as she continued. "You didn't deserve what happened that day. No one does." Marcus listened intently, his gaze steady. When she finished speaking, he took a deep breath before responding. "Thank you for saying that," he said finally. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. And while what happened affected me deeply, I believe people can change, if they're willing to put in the work." He paused, offering a faint smile. "From what I've seen, you've been doing that." Patricia exhaled, relief washing over her. "That means more than I can say," she replied softly. They parted ways shortly afterward, exchanging polite nods before returning to their respective groups. Though their encounter was brief, it carried profound significance, for both of them and for everyone watching. It was a testament to the power of growth, forgiveness, and human connection. As the gala drew to a close, Marcus found himself reflecting on the evening. Seeing Patricia again had stirred complex emotions, but it also reinforced his belief in the possibility of redemption. People weren't defined solely by their worst moments. They were capable of evolving, of bridging divides, of building bridges where none existed before. And perhaps, he thought, that was the most important lesson of all. Life moved forward, carrying with it the echoes of Flight 347, a reminder of humanity's flaws, its resilience, and its capacity for change. For Marcus and Patricia, the journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worthwhile. Together, in their own ways, they had contributed to a larger narrative, one of hope, healing, and the relentless pursuit of justice.